Hi everyone, I'm Cathy Davidson.
Bill Kelly.
And we're teaching a class called Mapping the Futures of Higher Education. And everybody in this class is either teaching or directing a program at one of the CUNY campuses. And today we're doing a session on student-centered pedagogy, and it's being run by Michelle Gabay, who teaches developmental English at Kingsborough Community College, Danica Savannah, who's doing Introduction to Narrative at Queens College, and Hallie Scott, who's doing art history and its meaning at Brooklyn College. Take it away.
So we thought we'd just give you a sense of our outline for the day before we get started. We're going to introduce ourselves.
Let me just pause for a second. Please come in, Joseph. This is Michael Josefovich, otherwise known as Tough Love for X. I'm so happy to meet you.
After 4 or 5 years, it's appropriate.
Please join. Sorry, these are our yes, by all means.
Oh.
So our outline, we're going to introduce ourselves quickly. Danica's going to give us a little bit of history of open admissions at CUNY. And then we'll talk about the readings. I know you all have a lot to say about the readings, and we're really excited about all of your responses to our prompt. Thank you for being so thoughtful. And then we'll break you up into small groups and do a little bit of group work. And then we'll come back as a class, share what you were talking about in your groups, and then the three of us will share some field notes from our experiments with student-centered pedagogy in our classes, and then we will do a wrap-up at the end.
Sure. So as you guys all know, I'm Danica. I'm a third-year doctoral candidate in the English department, and I just took my comps exam, I think last week. No. My orals exams, thank you. And so my research interests are pedagogy and social justice and experimental sites of education throughout U.S. history. So thinking about things like the freedom schools, but also how like communities of marooned slaves, right, the kinds of education and the kinds of activities that were going on there, and how those were imagined as alternatives to what was going on in mainstream U.S. history. So pedagogy and how it has been mobilized as sort of a response to conditions of social injustice.
Hi, I'm Michelle Gabay. I'm with the Mals department and I teach English at Kingsborough, but I was going for an individualized track in literature and context so I could combine a love of history and a new love of English. But I realized I really like teacher talk, and I can get really into talking about classes and lessons, and I thought, really, why am I not doing the urban education program? So I just declared it, and being in this class has changed my route a bit. So I'm going to go and get my master's in urban ed, and eventually, hopefully, do some research in literacy and academic success. I'm just really curious about how literacy affects maybe your professional life after college and during college, and I think that maybe there's never enough of that throughout our lives.
And I am an art historian, so I had to bring in images to talk about my research. So I'm a 6-year student, and I'm working on a dissertation on what I'm calling communication pedagogy in experimental art, architecture, dance, and design initiatives, educational initiatives in California in the late 60s and early 70s. So I'm interested in how all of these artists, dancers, architects, and designers were rejecting the traditional education that they had and working in interdisciplinary, creating ways of collaborating in interdisciplinary ways and focusing on process rather than the creation of a finished product, and in creating learning scenarios where people would have access to tools like new technology, new theory, and then be able to play with them rather than be sort of dictated in how to use these tools. And so I'm just showing you a few images. I'll give you one example. This van is a media van that an architecture and video group, Ant Farm, created. And they toured across country with this van, which was decked out with the newest, at the time, the newest video technology, and stopped at different schools and let students just play with everything in the van and experiment with it. So kind of mobile learning environment. And one other thing that I'll say about my research is a lot of these programs were brought into schools in different ways, either as visiting workshops or as semester-long courses, and that was because of a large amount of governmental funding for experimental projects at that time, and then by the mid-70s and the economic crisis of the mid-70s, that was really cut down, and these experimental initiatives sort of petered out. But there's a reemergence of a lot of them today. Yeah.
Can you talk about they're just so prominent, the parachute and the balloon?
Yeah. So Ant Farm is really interested in inflatable architecture, and they had these giant military parachutes, and this is called Ice 9, and it's an inflatable dwelling. And so they saw this as a counter to, especially to brutalist architecture and to masonry architecture, and as a way to live in this nomadic traveling mode. Yeah. And then just one other thing that I wanted to bring in is that I also work at an organization called the Wasaic Project, which is in Dutchess County, New York. And I'm the education director there, and one of the big things that I do is bring artists into public high school classrooms at a rural public high school in the area. And so I'm experimenting and testing a lot of what we're talking about in this class and a lot of what these people in the 60s and 70s were doing with the high school students. So I'm always thinking about that in the back of my mind in our class discussions. Okay.
Should we go back to this?
Yeah.
Okay. So I figured since we're here at CUNY, which has such a rich history of thinking about pedagogy and different kinds of learning, that we would do a little bit of situating ourselves in history. So just a few brief slides about the open admissions movement and the kinds of learning that educators were experimenting with to try and meet the demands and the needs of a new university population. This is a quote from an article by Rebecca Moore Howard, and she writes that Kenneth A. Bruffy dates modern interest in collaborative learning to the university's open admissions policies of the 1970s. Individualistic teaching methods proved ineffective for the new population of non-traditional university students, whereas collaborative pedagogies such as peer tutoring answered their needs. And CUNY in the late 60s and early 70s, right, was a really important site for thinking about open admissions. So there were two main factors that contributed between 1965 and 1970 to the emergence of these open admissions policies, which resulted in things like the SEEK program. And there was increased governmental funding for non-represented students, so big federal spending to get students into college to try and combat the war on poverty. And the other part of it was political pressure from members of the community. So for example, at City College, Black and Puerto Rican students shut down the South Campus and demanded that City College, the racial representation there, that reflect the actual diversity of the New York City public school system, which was really cool. So in the year 1969, right, the population at City College was 20,000 students. And then by 1970, just 1 year later, it was 35,000 students. So a huge increase in just 1 year, right? And so how do you meet the demands of all these new students, many of whom wouldn't have necessarily come to college if this increased funding hadn't been made available, if the open admissions policies weren't put into place? And one of the really exciting things is that there were a lot of these radical teacher poets who are working across the campuses, but especially at City College. So people like Adrienne Rich, June Jordan, Tony Cade Bombara, Audre Lorde, under the direction of Mina Shaughnessy, was in charge of those programs. And that moment, right, and these teachers working with these new students, that became really important for the history of composition and rhetoric. And there was a lot of experimenting and trying to learn with the students, learn alongside them, what kinds of learning they responded to, what would work best for them. And these are the same students, right, that had occupied City College, right? So they're really politically involved. They want to be there. They understand the importance of education. But there was something about like the standardized testing, the really individualistic and regimented methods of teaching that wasn't working for them. So I have sort of a longer quote by Audrey and Rich here, but I think it's an important one. So could I have a volunteer from the audience to read it for us? Yes, Richard.
It seems to me that one of the basic concerns of any program must be to try to help entering students discover a new relationship to learning. The most thoughtfully prepared, witty, or provocative lecture cannot do this, and I heard some of all three during the semester. As I listened and as I observed students' ways of listening or non-listening, and as I talked later with students in my own classroom and heard questions raised that had gone unspoken in the lectures, I became more and more convinced that although the lecture as art form and social event may still have a place in the university, the first needs of our freshmen are for something else, for a kind of classroom in which students find themselves having to learn for themselves and to teach each other more than they have ever been asked to do. The value of this is not merely to increase participation, but to break, once and for all, the modes and patterns which 12 years of public or parochial education have left as their legacy. When he or she can get rid of that legacy, the student can approach the lecture or the textbook or any other medium with an entirely different relationship. He will no longer accept it passively as an agent acting upon his mind, but as one of many materials on which his mind can act.
Great, thank you. So just thinking back to this moment in 1972 and how we're still kind of grappling with some of these questions. A lot of us, if we're working with new college students, I feel as an educator a lot of the time we're trying to undo a lot of the learning habits that they've acquired in the public school system or in a standardized education environment. And so just one more quick quote by June Jordan. She says, and speaking about teaching in the SEEK program during open admissions, it was quite amazing. We thought that if we could make democracy come to City College, that probably we could have an impact on the concept and perhaps even the practice of public education through the country. And so I thought this was an important quote from CUNY history, especially thinking about mapping the futures and the kind of work that we're doing in this class, the kinds of conversations we're having about pedagogy and the connectedness of teaching and research and how we're really trying to model some kind of institutional change, some kind of increased understanding of the value of public education as a fundamental, something that you need to have a robust democracy, right? So hoping that these conversations that we start in this classroom will expand outwards to other sites as well. So that's it for now. Should I do these real quick? Yeah. Okay. So we have a number of objectives for you guys, or things that we hope you'll get out of this class session. And one of which, this is a sort of low stakes challenge. These are different strategies for participating in conversation. As graduate students in this course, you guys are all excellent at participation. That's not something we have to worry about. But often with our undergrads, they might want to contribute, but not really know some different strategies for how to add their voices to a conversation. So in addition to participating in all the lovely, wonderful ways that I'm sure you're going to, I would challenge you to try and participate in the specific way that is indicated on your little slip, and then we'll debrief about those about halfway through the class. Some of them are hard, right? But I hope it'll be fun.
And then while Danica's passing those out, we wanted to start by spending about 20 minutes talking about the readings and also talking about your responses to the 2 prompts that we gave you on our site. So we wanted to start with the question, what from these readings could inform your teaching? And a lot of you addressed this to some extent in your prompts, but what did you take from these 3 readings that you can really see a way to bring into your classroom, into your teaching practice?
And also vice versa, right? Anything from your classrooms that kind of challenged what you read or made you think, well, maybe, maybe Ranciere's thing is a little, maybe that won't work in my classroom, right? Like maybe you have some situations that challenge some of what we've read. Evan already brought up one, right? Like a lot of his is based on student interest, but what happens when you're teaching a required course? So that's just one thing.
Can I ask a question first? I mean, are we supposed to actually do what's on these on these forums? Is that what's happening here?
At some point in the conversation.
Okay, okay.
Let me see what's on your phone.
Yeah, Rachel. Yeah.
So one part, I love the Carl Rogers adapted speech. That was really cool. But so one part on 135 that I was really interested in. I mean, it's sort of in a sense like a basic idea, right? Respect, and we've talked about it a lot. But like, what does that actually look like in the classroom? I think is really interesting, and it means so many things. So. I think maybe Maria mentioned this before, but anyway, so one of the ways is like knowing students, so knowing students' names, and then knowing that they have something that they're bringing to the classroom. So we've talked about that a lot in our programs, like students don't think they have anything, oftentimes anything to contribute coming in, especially like adult education students who haven't been in school for a while. And so, so that made me note like, what do they have to contribute from their home lives, from their educational experience, from their work experience? They have lots of skills, and so how do you bring that out in the classroom and capture that? And then I think like, just to add sort of back to the name thing, like knowing students' names and remembering things about them is just, seems really simple, but is so critical. Just in the same way that you know things about your friends and your family members, and that shows respect of knowing people. It's just, yeah, it's huge.
To build on that.
Actually, at some point,
If one of my teaching fails is actually using this assignment in class and the students refuse to participate, I'm not sure. Well, I say refuse, and I don't know why, right? I think some of it was nervousness, and maybe I didn't give the context well enough. So I love to like brainstorm how to make it work better. But I do have some thoughts. I'm really glad that you brought up the naming issue, because my favorite moment in this essay was the one on the next page where the teacher wrote "Why, Carl?" And I think one of the reasons that's so effective is just because the name gets written down. And I'm noticing now that I'm grading in Google Docs, I'm actually a lot more likely to do that than when I wrote comments in the margin or even typed comments in the margin, which is interesting. I'm not sure why exactly that is. And I also think that it's important for the teachers to know the names, but it's also important for the students to know each other's names. And I think I'm thinking through different ways to get my students to use each other's names more. Because sometimes I think they've gotten there, and then someone will say, "Oh, like the guy in the back said," and, not always. I feel like I should have done something more to get them to use each other's names.
So here's a stupid thing, or the application.
Get on your slip.
Use the word stupid at some point.
But like, it's a FERPA thing that you can't send out the list of emails of every student in your class. Like, I mean, and one of the things, given all of the fact that everybody has one of these damn things, is to take pictures and create like a student Facebook, right? So that like, oh, that's, Biao, or that's Catherine, or that's somebody. And it's like, FERPA has a great intent, but I think that we have to risk violating some of these rules in order to create an environment where, as you said, Rachel, people know each other and you know them.
This is exactly why we announced today the winners of our Trust Challenge for the Digital Media Learning Competition, because many of the rules that you need to protect people are also things that impede learning, especially for disadvantaged groups that might not have a formal setting like this. It's really, it's a two-edged sword. Who's a network? What is a network? How do you make a network? If you don't have a network, how do you make a network? And it's really hard if you have to do it within really restrictive rules. Totally understand.
So, well, I wanted to jump in from the science end, and this, this has been my sort of ongoing quest for the last several weeks, is how do we, a course like anatomy and heavy science, it's like, gosh, it's this beast that is what it is, and there's this expectation that I'm to teach this material, and those students are to know that material when I'm done. So I'm fascinated with this idea of how do I, you know, the Ranciere was really focused right on that. And I think, you know, Cathy, in your chapter, there's this term collaboration by difference, which I find fascinating, that we respect different levels and different expertise and culture, age, education, ability, background. I mean, gosh, if there's ever a world that does not do collaboration by difference, it's science.
Actually, that's not true though, because if you're a PI on a grant, what you do is you find people who do the things you don't do.
Well, I think that I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But at an advanced level, when you're in undergraduate courses in science, it's very much, this is what you're going to, I mean, you know, I have a degree in microbiology from a major university. It was, you know, sort of memorization hell. And the person who memorized the most won.
Right. Although I'm convinced that's one reason we have a STEM crisis in this country, because it's a very poor way of teaching science.
Yeah, I completely agree. But what I'm saying is, it brings up this whole idea of when you're an individual teacher too, that I think we need to, you know, I need sort of my department on board too.
Yes.
So that everybody's a part of this, everybody's going to look at this at the same time and consider interesting ways, how can the students teach each other and not sit there through an endless lecture that
There's
goes...
a disconnect, is there not, Richard, between the ways in which scientific research takes place, which is almost entirely interdisciplinary, especially grant-funded sponsored research, and the ways in which departments continue to teach largely within disciplinary frames and outsource the teaching to lab assistants and to graduate students. Is there some sense in which there is a possibility for that to alter?
Well, listen, I feel like I'm in the middle of it. It's like I'm sort of having my world turned upside down, you know? It's like, here's your course, here's your 700-page textbook, Richard, and do it. And so now I'm looking at this going, oh, wait a minute, it's right there in the Ranciere. It's not all up to me. It does not fall onto my shoulders whether they all get it as it says, you know, we're going to take a chance and we're going to do this, and somebody might learn nothing. And this is the risk you take right there in the Ranciere. But the benefits are tremendous if they start to, I was saying to Cathy earlier, is I'm realizing, oh, like this week I get what I'm going to do. The kids, they're all blogging about it now. They're all over blogging all over the site. It's the ones that, I'm having trouble with this. Does anybody have any ideas on that? And everybody thought, you know, I'm going to turn this on their heads a little bit on Friday and pick an area where some of them are not good at this and some of them are good at this, and put them in small groups and see if they can come up and take the person who thought they had the most trouble with it and hand them my remote and the clicker and the slides and go back over last week's lecture. You know, you see how you do now explaining this to us. If everybody in small groups clumped together and helped you with that, how did that go? And I think that's a perfect example, because there's an interesting point that's made, is the advanced scientists know that go it alone is not going to fly.
Exactly.
But as an undergraduate, it is every man for himself. And, you know, 2/3 of a class at major universities never become science majors. They're tossed out after the first year and the second year.
So what we're hoping is with a little bit more of these methods is maybe half. It might not be all become scientists, but maybe we improve 10%.
Well, we certainly never considered the group that maybe would learn a different way, that would have gifts to bring to science, but that were not going to be master memorizers.
Let me follow up with what you were saying about Ranciere with a cause and effect question.
Tread lightly, Dr. Keller.
And this goes to Danica while we're still on the reading for the. I'm interested in cause and effect vis-a-vis cultural context. When you talk about Ken Bruffy, who was running things at Brooklyn in those days, and the sainted Mine Shaughnessy, the great beings to ever walk the planet. But both of those were embedded in a context not simply of open admission or change at City, but a kind of context of change about the way in which we thought about teaching. I mean, whether you think about, in those days, Marie Ponceau and Rosemary Dean, who were Queens, Marilyn Sternglass, who was at City then, Sandy Shore. I mean, the university was full of people who were trying to think about different ways of responding to teaching, particularly composition, in classrooms of students who were different from what had normally been the mainstream. Ranciere comes out of the experiments at Paris-Wheat. I mean, when they build their own campus in Parc Vincent, and they send in the bulldozers and bulldoze the campus and move it to Saint-Denis, and they put that out there, and the split what Althusser happens around that time. But it's the same notion. Students who are not conventional students at the University of Paris, you know, when that gets divided at post-68, and there is such a context for having that kind of experimental thing happen that percolates through students as well as through faculty. So there's a kind of cultural cause and a pedagogic effect that you're talking about. What do you see in the current circumstance? I mean, as we sit here, I believe the president is talking about student debt program to talk about that, giving a speech to that thing. Do you read the current context as propitious for the kinds of change we're talking about, either in terms of a sense of, you know, sort of afterflow of Occupy in one sense, but more to the point, the ongoing conversation about college and the college crisis?
Sure, yeah, the student debt crisis. I feel like a lot of teaching in classrooms makes that into a question and asks students, you know, what does it feel like to have debt? Like, why are you, for me, I teach at 7:45 in the morning. Like, why are you here at 7:45? And at Queen's, debt isn't so much our students' problem, but really they're balancing like 16, you know, jobs, and they're doing all kinds of different things. And really to ask them to reflect on why it is that they're pursuing an education, why they're taking these classes, what they want to get out of it. And a lot of my own teaching is inspired by not necessarily a little bit Occupy, but also some of the movements that came out of Occupy Wall Street. So the Free University of New York City, right, which are these pop-up universities in parks throughout the city, super horizontal, right? Everyone like actually sits on the floor in a circle, and they use Robert's Rules of Order, and you learn to sort of live and to work with other people in a different, very non-hierarchical, very horizontal, very lateral space, and it's completely student-led. Like, in order for this to happen, people have to show up in a park, they have to want to be there. So I think, and so that, at least that has been informing my teaching. It sounds like, you know, you guys as well, especially with your research on the experimental art. I wonder if that...
Yeah, I mean, MFAs today are incredibly exorbitant, and the job payoff is, you know, highly questionable for after in a visual art, at least MFA. And like the free universities, there are probably hundreds of initiatives in the arts that are alternative modes of exchanging skills and ideas, and reading groups around art education as a way to sort of create alternative networks to the networks that you might form in an MFA. So I think there's very much a cultural movement, or at least many cultural spaces for this happening outside of schools. And I think, you know, we're an example of it trying to happen in schools, but I think there's a long way to go.
If I may gradually shift the focus. Back to your original question. This is rather a general point, but I was struck, I think, I forget who said this on the comment thread, but after reading these 3 readings, I stepped away, and I was really, I always thought that I relinquished control in the classroom, but I didn't realize that not nearly enough. And I was thinking, and I was hoping this would open up a discussion about how much confidence it requires in yourself as a teacher, and a belief in these principles of peer learning to take this role of a facilitator rather than a teacher, especially when there is this idea coming from the students, partly perhaps as well, that you should be an expert and you should be the expert, and how to change that dynamic in the classroom, and how much confidence that requires as a teacher.
I would add to that also, thinking about the assumptions and stereotypes that students walk into the classroom, especially based on race, class, gender, age, what you look like, right? It's one thing to do a student-centered classroom when you're like an older white male professor, when you're a young female, especially a woman of color. students sometimes already will not think that you have authority, or will be already, right there challenging, do you have this authority? So to relinquish that, it can be really scary because you feel like it's tenuous to begin with.
And please go ahead. I'd love to hear from you. Please.
I don't see the challenge to authority in wanting to bring some sort of creativity in the classroom. If you commend what you're doing, and it might be new, but if you seem to be confident and you take an initiative and you're in charge, you're not just looking like you are attempting something because you're not sure of yourself, But if you seem to know what you're doing, I don't think there should be a challenge to your authority, as long as you have really thought it through, and you commend the process. When I mean commend, I'm not talking about being authoritative, but that you can listen when you need to listen, you can change course when you need to change course, but you're in charge of the process. Also, one thing I wanted to bring up, the idea of questions I would ask myself if I were a teacher. I'm always interested in people's story. And I think that relates very much to the whole education process. And the image that comes to my mind is the image in Amistad, the movie, where the leader of the slaves goes to see the former president of the United States, John Adams, the father, and he was looking at his plants, and suddenly this guy recognized a flower from Africa, and he got excited. And John Adams was intrigued, and after they talk about the plant, he turned toward the guy and he asked the guy, "What's your story?" And that always had a very important effect on me. And also he told him, that's what's going to matter in the trial, because people need to know your story. And if I've been teaching, but not lately, not formally, I would. Any class, even a very hardcore science class, I'd be interested in knowing the student's story in whatever way or format. If it's onto Facebook, in presentation, or if it's a large class, dividing them in group, even if I don't get to know the story personally, but people in the group would more or less know the story. And to finish with my point, there was a very important talk on TED about a woman of color who was a teacher for a long time. She said that the most important thing about teaching is the relationship. And it might not just be the relationship between the professor and the student, but the relationship between students in the group. And I think I see knowing the student's story in the context of that relationship. Otherwise, it's not really teaching. It's a conference, it's an exposition, or it's just an expose.
Just to follow up on what you said about the story, there's a teacher in Alberta, Canada. His name is Sean Granger, one of my Twitter friends. But he has about probably 25 years of working, especially with boys. He's interested in boys who are in trouble. That's his thing. And his major story that he bands around is the importance of knowing a student's story. So it's just to support. He has a very number of, I think, brilliant blog posts on that issue. And if there's a way, I'll be glad to tweet them to you or send them to you or something.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll post them. That's great.
Okay, should I send it to you or who should I send
Or
it to?
just tweet it with the futures as hashtag.
Oh, okay, fine.
And we'll post it.
Okay.
Also, one of the assignments coming out of this class is we're going to ask everyone to contribute something to a collaborative Google Doc.
Oh,
so if you could just link to it there, then
Sure.
we can all have access to it.
Yeah, Irene.
Yeah, to make a summary observation about some of the things I've been hearing so far, while touching on some of the themes I've been hearing, such as, relinquishing control and respect and the ability to tell your story and also hear the story of your students in the classroom. I think it's very important to create an environment in the classroom early on in the course where, by doing maybe activities where you show yourself as a person, you see your students as people that are kind of meeting in the middle of this journey, this educational journey, in order to create an environment, a workspace, where you as a teacher are confident to relinquish control, and the students are confident enough to kind of rise to the challenges that you're giving them, take on some of these peer activities and feel confident doing that as well. I don't know if any of you do anything, maybe an activity on the very first day of class, even just going around and have every student say their name and something about themselves. Or if you tell your kind of academic story, like how did I get to be here now in the classroom? Any sort of activity like that.
I have two thoughts. One is answering my own question about this exercise of these rhetorical moves. All of us are making fun of it a little bit, like kind of dramatically, hilariously reading our own assigned thing, and I was thinking about how that might actually work for students. Like, okay, really dramatically ham it up, read, please read what your assigned thing is, and try to tie that to actually doing it.
It works.
Joke isn't as scary. So I'm going to try that, and I'm going to get back to you and let you know how it goes.
I mean, humor is an amazing confidence builder. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
It's a great thing.
Self-deprecation is a huge part of my philosophy. But the other thing I was thinking is something I always do on the first day that works really well, and actually can be fairly self-deprecating too, is ask students to share one thing they're excited about and one thing that they're nervous about.
Oh, okay.
It's amazing the stuff that comes out of this time. The nervous things were actually, some of them were primal fears, and I pointed that out, that my own included was snakes, and that's not something I'm nervous of. I'm definitely afraid of snakes, but it broke a lot of the ice immediately, especially when students started to see, oh, I'm also afraid of clowns, or one student said she's afraid of math, and another one said that math was the thing she's excited about. So ways in which the fears and the excitements came together, and that was also a way for students to kind of start looking around the room and going, oh, you're interested in what I'm interested in. So that always works really well.
Can I ask how old your kids are?
They're freshmen.
I just want to piggyback on what Irene said in recurring themes. And connecting with your students, it's important. I so agree. Your students have to be able to connect with you. A quick story, when I taught in high school, it was really difficult for me to connect with the students, right? And that was a high school in Brooklyn, mostly minorities. Even though I myself was a minority, the students saw me out there and not connected to them. And I just stopped the class one day and had a conversation. And I spoke about myself. They asked me questions about myself, and when they realized, wow, I lived in their neighborhood, right? Oh, you're one of us now. And I connected with them then. And all of a sudden, I was not just a teacher, but I was a real human being that didn't see teachers as humans, And the class flowed smoothly. And that was a lesson to me. So with my classes now, I teach at the community colleges where there's a diverse, background of students coming in with different stories. And they're nervous. I'm teaching chemistry, and many of them believe that I'm not going to make this, but it's required. And when they realize, well, you know what? I started just like you did. I actually attended BMCC. They're like, no way. So that's like a cool icebreaker, and all of a sudden we're on the same level. It's like, she was one of us, and she's doing this amazing job. That's in their eyes, amazing job, even though many times I don't think I'm doing an amazing job, But there you are, And so the students need to know they could connect it with you, that, you didn't go to this university, you have all this knowledge, and they cannot reach you, they cannot reach those heights. If they see you as a real human being with real struggles, they could easily connect with you, and they say, well, if you can do it, then I can as well. Yeah, but this is like the micro level. I want to do my part, so I won't forget. I want to go to the macro level, like the recurring theme. It's like, but I want to touch upon what Bill Kelly said in terms of grad students and lab assistants teaching the courses. Someone said, I can't remember who said this, I changed the world, I changed myself, so I kind of switch it around. I changed my approach to teaching. and therefore I change my students' future. But we are here in this classroom. We are learning great things about our approach to teaching. But many of the grad students, many of the lab assistants, first of all, the term pedagogy, they have no idea what that means. Summative, formative, high stakes, low stakes. They have no idea about curriculum, nothing. They just get a syllabus, they teach. As you said, Richard, especially in science, we see this a lot. Here's the book, good luck. This is the macro level. We know what pedagogy and all these cool terms are about and how to apply it. My question is, there are students, there are teachers out there, educators out there have no idea. And our students, our kids are in danger. As we said, 2/3 or even greater students will never make it.
But see, you guys are all going to change this.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the whole point.
And that's my question.
Right?
That's,
I mean, you're
yeah.
teaching 350, there's only 12 of you. And you're teaching 350 students. Next year, there's going to be 4 or 5 of these classes. There'll be about 1,500 students.
That's
It
But,
does
and every
have
one
a
of these kids is different now.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Already.
Absolutely.
kids-
There is a multiplier effect.
And
It's
just
not
to-
going to happen
And to
overnight.
piggyback
but
on
there is a
the, for
multiplier
sure, to
effect.
piggyback on the last thing, I'll just throw this in about my kids. What I'm really seeing in the last 48 hours of our websites and the blogging is all of a sudden, because I gave a doc, it's like, if you want to come visit it, it's like, it's the Wild West over there. At Lehman A&P.
In audiology. It's me and audiology.
They are bouncing off the walls, but what I'm really seeing is I'm like, oh, I'm seeing my way maybe to group projects simply for one reason. They're forming relationships with one another. If they hadn't formed relationships with one another, I'm looking at this going, you gotta be kidding me.
Can we look at, can all of us look in?
I invited almost everybody when we set it up, I think. Mine's public, so mine's public.
I didn't know if what because I've been looking in on your.
Oh, and
I didn't
anybody,
know if
please
everyone
comment.
would, but
The
it's
kids
up
would
to-
love
it
it
is
if anybody
amazing.
commented. Come jump in.
I mean, I think we would make a difference, but my question is, and I think I'm jumping over into policy making. It's like, how do we reach the other educators?
Let me
How do you go reach the what?
The other educators, the instructors, those who have
Well,
been
we
given
got
the
the
buck.
former president here.
Hold on. What educators? Are we talking about university professors?
Everybody.
Come on, who wants to teach? Everybody wants to do research.
No, I don't think so.
Everybody knows what's going on at universities, okay? If you're good at teaching, you're not that good at research. They are research universities. Most great universities are research universities. And I've heard from professors.
There's research one
A lot of people are not interested in teaching.
I couldn't disagree more strongly. I think it's a cliche. I think it's conventional wisdom, and I don't think it holds water. I think that certainly there is an emphasis, varies from university to university. The challenge, I don't think, question is not do we value teaching, do we value research. I think it has to do with change. The critical questions have to do with moving more and more toward contingent workforces. And how do we recognize that reality at the university and to create ways in which teaching becomes, never mind valued through tenure, that's a whole other question, but becomes satisfying in a way that is itself, people don't do this because of the bucks, they do it because of the pleasure. And you make it more pleasurable, you make that happen. But the challenge, and many of you mentioned this in your blogs, has to do with time. And there's a perception, which Cathy confirmed and I would agree with, that doing this kind of teaching, the kind of collaborative teaching, student-centered teaching, takes an enormous amount of time to get it done. And if we're talking, I'm sorry?
And money. How are you gonna get the time if you're not paid well, you gotta want?
Yeah,
Right.
well, there is, absolutely. There's
That's what I meant about the
yeah,
contingent
yeah.
workforce. So the question I have, not an answer, but a question for the table, is, okay, if the goal is to have this rhizomatic effect that we're now 350 students and next year 1,500 students, and it continues to build like compounded interest, how do you address the question about time? I mean, which, when this is not the first time people have talked about pure learning. I mean, Danica was talking about this earlier. And one of the pushbacks is, are you kidding me? I'm trying to teach 5 sections at the same time. I'm trying to be, I'm here and I'm there. I'm also trying to do these other kinds of things. I really don't have time to do that. How do you respond to the question about time and the relationship between preparation and energy that one spends in the classroom and the yield that we are seeing as we go forward?
Why did you take tenure out of the equation?
Sorry?
Why did you take tenure out of the equation?
It's a separate subject, but happy to talk about it.
But that's exactly what the problem is.
If the
when you want tenure,
and
you want to do research.
If you've got 30% of your courses being taught by tenured faculty and 70% by non-tenured, there's a bigger question than that one. Happy to talk about that one.
And I just want to throw this in as a graduate student who's up to my neck in work. And this is taking me much longer. As I said, I have a part-time job managing these posts, and who's in and who's out, and congratulating them all for joining in, and I'm so happy. And there's part of me going, oh my God, I've never, but I'm having, so the answer, Dr. Kelly, to your question is this. I'm having 1,000 times the fun that I would have had otherwise. So I'm sort of like a little bit like, I don't think I can pull this off, but I'm not thinking about money. For once, I get to talk about money. I get it. And I could be, listen, I can sit and bitch about money better than anybody. But and about how many hours I can do that. Watch me do that. But I'm not thinking about money. I'm like so thrilled. I'm having such a good time with them that I'm like, I can't believe it. I can't believe we're turning anatomy and physiology, the speech mechanism, into this wild, fabulous learning experience that they're all right blogging. I can't wait for the next class. Who says that about anatomy? Everybody says I can't wait till May 22nd, not I can't wait for the next class. Shocking.
Are we studying?
Okay. Yeah, should we?
Yeah.
Can I make one quick point? It was
Yeah.
See what happens when
you said research and pedagogy are inextricably linked for me. So partly because of the way that I work and the way that a lot of us in this room work, also because I'm in composition and rhetoric, so that's pretty much a given for a lot of competent faculty. You can't separate them. So you're constantly thinking about both of those things, so that's a partial response to your question. They're inextricable for a lot of us.
Yeah, but I hope that lasts all that energy and excitation, because there is a time where reality is setting, job security. Because you're talking about time.
Right.
It's about money, it's about job security, it's about all these things. And somebody brought up the issue of policy here. And it's a policy issue. And
I think we need to move. I just want to add one more thing, because I'm totally, I think it is fun to do peer learning, but I don't want to let that eclipse like the real dire need for some kind of cultural change where we value what we count, right? Like if teaching is what we prioritize, then we need to put money behind teaching. And there can't be this rumor of like, you're going to go on the job market, you have to have great research, nobody's going to look at your teaching record.
It's so not true.
Right, so we need to have universities that are as interested in like, well, what do your classrooms look like, right? Like, what are your students doing in that class? Let's also talk about your research and how the two are connected. Right. But like, it needs to be both. It can't just be the fun. It can't be like ignoring the material conditions that are attached to them. It has to be both.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Maria said real quick about how do we sort of penetrate the other disciplines and other educators. I think that there's a tradition in academia to sort of teach to your discipline, and like pedagogy tends to be, when you cross into someone's discipline, it tends to be a little bit of a violation. Conversations we're having, and with more faculty development and professional development and thinking about our classrooms. And I think science teachers trying to break the struggle of teaching science and math, you have more of these conversations. I was at the copy machine yesterday making copies for my class, and I ran into a biology professor, and I used the term STEM, and she said, "Did you just say STEM? I thought only high school was using that." And I said, "No, I think we're crossing it into higher ed now." And she was like, "What do you know about STEM?" And so we were just talking about it, and she was really excited to talk about reflecting, like as you did with your group, and to talk about her scaffolding methods. And she was really excited about how science, is almost like, we ended up talking about how science is sort of like, it seems almost like the beginning, the Adam and Eve of scaffolding, because you have labs in science. Like, what is a lab, right? A lab is meant to sort of bridge what you learn in the class into some kind of hands-on experiential experience, right? And then it just reminded me of what Janie said in the post about, you know, that it's also about resources, right? Looking for these external resources. So you were mentioned something about, I think it was an internet virtual sort of lab where you could, they were doing research in China and then doing research and they were crossing, and then it's fascinating, right?
Collaborative stuff.
Really collaborative stuff.
Where students are connecting with each other across borders. So it takes student-centered pedagogy to sort of a new level where students are connecting virtually. So I think that's like a whole fascinating level of student-centered pedagogy.
Especially when you're
not really being delved into.
So I think we should take this idea of interdisciplinarity into our next exercise, where we're going to put you in interdisciplinary groups. Yeah. So maybe we'll give you a minute to group. Should we want groups of 4?
Sure.
Yeah. So we want groups of 4, and we want you to be in groups with people of all different disciplines. Okay, so in your groups, we're going to ask that you start by each individually taking 3 minutes to respond to this prompt. So grab a sheet of scrap paper, take 3 minutes, and just think about this, free write, in response to this prompt.
Think of your weakness, right? What subjects or disciplines you find challenging. For me, it would be math. And think about how you would learn best in that area. This is sort of inspired by Larry Michelson's team-based learning pedagogy, and he came up with this idea that, like, usually the best student-centered kind of class is a class that has these permanent groups where they really get to know each other, like 5 to 7 students in each group, and there's a whole system where they're like accountable for the material, so they have to prepare and really read the assignments at home, come in ready for an exam on it, then a group exam, and then another sort of hands-on activity, and then they get graded really quickly. The idea is that you do an assessment and you also return the information back to the students as quick as possible so that they really know whether it was successful or not. And if, you also as a teacher would know if it was effective. And so instead of just, his idea is really rigid though. It's like you really have to follow it. And I don't necessarily think you need to follow it as religiously, but the idea is that everyone in the group should have a role, a task, okay? So your group should have a reporter, a recorder, a manager, and a researcher, right? And if you have 5 people in your group, you can maybe have two reporters, someone who, if you leave something out, they'll jump in and help you out, or maybe 2 recorders, so 2 people taking notes and listening.
So you had 3 roles?
Yeah, it's
manager?
Reporter, researcher, manager.
This would work in your concept.
And the researcher can use whatever electronic device or book or physical device that they have to look anything up as you're discussing. And then,
so really that one person who's got the digital device is the person who should really be thinking about that task and how to use it. The person who's taking notes is sort of building a skill of like taking minutes and really just like listening and actively engaging with their minds in the paper. And then that also has to translate to the reporter, right? So they have to take notes with that person in mind so that the reporter so that they can make sense of it. So we want you guys to pick a role, right, in your group. Someone be the reporter, someone be the recorder, someone be the manager, and someone be the researcher. And talk about the free writing answers you came up with. And maybe think about different ideas for how to approach a lesson that would maybe help sort of bridge that challenge you have, right? Or talk about the lesson, the activity or the learning that is best for you to maybe give the other instructor an idea about what to implement in their class. right? And so then the idea is that we will go around the groups and the reporter will share, you know, some of the ideas that came out of their discussion.
I don't understand the difference between a reporter and a recorder.
The reporter is gonna actually the reporting it is gonna talk to the class, and the recorder is gonna take notes.
Can we define researcher also as a key term? And because I think that's critical to the group. But seriously, understanding, what does researcher mean in this context? Because how are we researching this?
So if there's something that maybe you in this case, in this context, if there was something that you wanted to see, like, would that work, right? Like, have other teachers tried that? You could go on your device, Google it, right? See what you find. Go to Haystack, perhaps.
Or go back through your readings and see if something addresses that in your readings.
Yeah.
So we're going to give you 10 minutes, and then we'll go back around. Yeah.
Just the best idea.
Oh, good.
Sorry, thank you for asking. Keep time and sort of make sure you stay on track and don't deflect out of the conversation. Thanks for asking.
So, which reporter wants to start us off?
All right, I'll go. So our group was Cathy and Gwen and Janie and Sean. We had so much to say that we had 2 recorders, Cathy and Gwen. Our manager was Janie. Our researcher was Sean. And basically, the conversation went to 2 elements of this. One was as the learner, and the other element was really as the teacher of something you didn't feel expert at. There were like two parallel conversations that kept intersecting and crossing back. And a key word that came up was this idea of anxiety and feeling anxious when you're learning something out of your comfort zone, and what a barrier to learning anxiety is. And that it was important for us individually to find strategies to deal with anxiety, to kind of find a peaceful place in yourself when you're feeling anxious, learning something you don't feel good at. And then talking about if you were a teacher, Gwen brought up a great point, this great sentence is, what does education for non-mastery look like? Like, we feel like it's education that then we were talking about science people, how science people are just, we're brought up, we're trained, it's not our fault. We're not trained to enjoy education for the sake of education. Nothing is for the sake of education, and aggrandizement is a human spirit. It is all a goal-oriented mastery process, which causes this tremendous anxiety. So the wrap-up of the whole thing is, as a learner and as a teacher, is part of, and Cathy brought this up, is this idea of letting yourself off the hook. And a great way to let yourself off the hook is to ask for help. If you're learning something and you're not good at it, ask for help. If you're teaching something and you don't feel expert at it, let yourself off the hook. Let yourself off the hook with your students, let yourself off the hook with your department chair, let yourself off the hook so that you can learn in the process, because none of us does any of our best work learning when we're anxious.
Great.
Can I just add one part that Sean contributed that I had not really thought about before, that so many people who are teachers have always been excellent students.
Right.
And Sean brought up the point that often the progression from learning to expert feels like it has to happen instantly. And if it doesn't, then you feel like a failure. And I know in my career I've seen so many people defeat themselves as professors by feeling like failures when they just were still learning what they were doing. On the way to writing a book, writing an article, being teachers, the idea that you had to be perfect, go from nothing to perfect overnight. And that was really, for me, a very important.
Great, thank you. Could we have the next group?
So our approach, actually I was in a group with Carl, Cathy, and Evan, and myself, Maria. So our approach was, what type of learners we are, how do we process information to become masters of it? So I will share what Evan and I came up with, because we're similar, and it's strange because we are both science people. So for being out of our comfort zone, most of our comfort zone topics include history and art, right? So how do we learn this? How could we conceptualize this? For Evan and myself, right? It's not figures, it's not numbers, it's not graphs. Doesn't make sense, right? So in the classroom, the educator, the instructor, the teacher, they paint this one picture. And sometimes you get that picture, but the way our minds, our brains work, we have to grab that picture, we have to grab the information, and we have to come away by ourselves. And then we have to break apart that information, and we have to recreate a different picture, but have the same outcome. For example, the instructor will say 1 + 1 is 2. We get that, we take that. But we have to go and break that 1 into fractions, plus the 1 into fractions, and we'll still end up to 2. So that's how we conceptualize.
Yeah, and the rest, those two, I feel, well, Catherine and Cathy, the way I perceive they understand it, both those two and these two, it's that there's a level of anxiety because I think these two, Maria and Evan, they really want to master things. Even though it's a field that they don't know, they want to master it. Unless they master it, they don't feel good. And Catherine needs to have to see concrete. The subject she's not good at is math. So she feels like she has to see in concrete terms. Like if you tell her 3 meters, she's got to walk the 3 meters. to experience it. And Katina also she feels like she has to break down the task in small tasks that she can accomplish and get a sense of mastery of and maybe move on to larger project as she's getting good at it. Myself, I am a very curious person. I don't have that kind of anxiety. I just plunge into it and then I figure things out, but I'm at it, like I got in there and I check what people are doing, I relate, but I do from time to time need to take a step back, get perspective, I need to get the larger picture and get the sense of what the programs are, what the outlines are and stuff like that. And I plunge again and that process continues and differently for me. I relate and I take a step back, I relate and I form a picture.
Great, thanks. Subsequent groups, you get extra credit if you can keep it short and like 3 main points. Yeah.
I can do that. So our group right here, we talked about multiple diverse assessment methods, grading or assessment methods, so different ways to evaluate learning from the teacher perspective, and then autonomy, student autonomy in the criteria. So we were talking a little bit about like the contract learning, so in that assessment criteria, and interdisciplinary teaching. So I was just remembering like one of my favorite courses in college, even though I was never into science, was science and politics, and the way it was really interdisciplinary.
That's great, thank you. And one more group?
So our group, happily like-minded students, shared some anxieties, including learning to see, we have a scientist who mentioned a fear of another kind of science. Fantastic. I was expecting the sort of humanities science divide. So we ended up talking a lot about binaries and how, in terms of comfort zones, how unhelpful a binary can be, and what it means to really try to pull away from thinking in kind of black and white terms and go more to the gray, because sometimes comfort and discomfort are really closely linked in interesting ways. And we also talked about learning things in a low stakes environment. So whether it's in like low stakes assignments, whether it's think, pair, share, whether it's, I loved your example of learning from your roommate. So like coming to someone that you trust with questions and the ways that those questions can differ, if you would ask them with someone else.
That's great. Any follow-up on the assignment?
Okay, so next week, right? Or this week, are we?
We can do that.
I was gonna think of. We'll wait till the end. That works.
Well, we can do it now. too now.
It's not a secret. So after this conversation, right, think of trying to bridge this gap for maybe your students who find your class to be maybe the most difficult class, right, the one that's out of their comfort zone. And think of a student-centered activity that would maybe really get at their core. Get at the core of maybe their fear, maybe their learning. How can you scaffold it? How can you help them unpack it? Maybe perhaps just build a lesson that will really help them build that knowledge, right? Maybe it's going back a little, building the prior knowledge so that you can scaffold into the new knowledge. And so think about that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something major that you take, but something that you feel like your students are exploring for themselves, and you're being a bit experimental about it.
And so what we're going to do for the next maybe 15 to 20 minutes is model some of the activities that we do in our classrooms with the hope that it will inspire you guys to try something that maybe you haven't tried before. So I really like, this is perfect transition, right? Hillary ended with the idea of high and low stakes, different, investments, or like doing an activity, right, that won't necessarily kill their grade, just to get out of their comfort zone, just to try something different. So I'm going to start high stakes and then move to a series of medium and low stakes things. And so when planning collaborative assignments, which is my big thing. So we talked a little bit about different learning styles, but for me, I think collaboration by difference, I really try and maximize those in my classroom. So this is again from the Rebecca Moore-Howard article, and she suggests that a collaborative assignment should be one that is best accomplished by a group rather than an individual. And I think that's really important, right? So not just assigning something that you could have done on your own, just have a group do it, but like figuring out what is an assignment that will maximize different strengths and different resources of having multiple people involved in it. And so these are 3 different ways of doing that. So it could be labor intensive. It could be a really big task that can only be accomplished if you break it down into smaller component parts. It could be a task that requires multiple areas of expertise. So this is that conversation about collaboration by difference that we've been having. And the high stakes assignment that I'm going to show you is a form of that. And then it could be a project involving synthesis. So maybe you ask your students to take into account multiple perspectives on an issue and to maybe come to an argument or to do a literature review and to really demonstrate how different perspectives would view like one similar topic or argument. And that way that would maximize like the different abilities of the students, their different interests. It would force them to go out maybe and do field research and talk to people. And therefore maximizing the collaborative experience. So what I did in my composition classroom is I structured basically the entire course so that they would be able to do this as their final project. And so the final assignment, I was teaching, the theme of the course was on creativity. So students were working on articulating their own theories of creativity, moving back and forth between sort of primary text examples and doing close readings of artworks and literary texts and poems, and thinking about how creativity works in the context of business and education. So really like going back and forth and applying these specific examples to more theoretical and conceptual issues. And so for the final project, I asked them to do 3 things. So they had already written a research paper on a topic of their choice. So it had to be their theory of creativity, but I had students working in everything from like art during the Holocaust and the kinds of artworks that children were producing, to questions of privilege and education and like who gets to be creative and the kinds of things that Cathy was talking about in her book. And I've had students work on like intoxication and music and how all of these different things that they're interested in relate to creativity. So the final task asked them to collaboratively write an introduction to their website, like a home page, right, that would let the user know what they're going to get out of that website. It had to include images and other media, and it had to have at least 3 different pages that represent their findings in an organized way. And so I was thinking about the Carl Rogers we read for today, and one of the questions he suggests asking, right, is what are the interests, goals, aims, purposes, passions of these students? And that's part of what I hope to do with this assignment, is really figure out what their interests are and allow that to come through and to have them sort of synthesize these divergent projects and think about how they would come together, but also like what are the points of divergence? What would you guys agree upon? What would be a case study that all three of you could look at, and to present that to an audience in an interesting way. And so I just have screenshots of three of the examples. This is the one of students working on creativity and oppression. So one was looking at education, one was the student studying the Holocaust, and the other was looking at the appropriation of works by people of color. And so this group had a student, I had multiple computer science students in my writing class, which was great, and they knew so much more about, the behind the scenes, like HTML, all of that stuff. And so when they were doing their final presentations, they presented to the class and sort of showed us, they went behind the scenes and like showed us the HTML coding they were doing. And it was a great way for me to, it wasn't even modeling, like not knowing, I didn't know. And like I actually learned so much from my students. I was like, this is great. No, did not fake it at all. Yeah. They taught me so much, so it was really great. This was students who were my really like pragmatic, like business, money-making oriented students, thinking about why creativity is important for business, right, for companies like Google. And the other one, students we had done a unit on dreams, so they were looking at all different facets of dreams and creativity. And so this assignment really allowed me to advance my pedagogical goals. So it's a basic composition course, and I'm trying to have students think about rhetorical situations, have them think about audience. What is the purpose of this thing you're creating? Why are you writing it? What do you imagine is the skill set of your audience? How do you tailor your language for that skill set? How do you incorporate evidence, right? How do you present it in a stylish way? We ended up talking a lot about design. We talked about universal design. And they had the whole vocabulary for talking about these things that was informed by the conversations that we had been having in class, talking about, writing an academic essay. What can we learn from those skills, right? What applies to web design? What other terms do we need to use that maybe we haven't been using? And they just had such like an intuitive knowledge of these things. We had done some close readings of websites, trying to think, okay, like what makes a good website? So a lot of this assignment, in order to build up to it, it was extremely scaffolded. I had been doing small group projects all along. I think, Richard, you mentioned this, like the importance of students getting to know one another. So it wasn't just like all of a sudden collaborative assignment. And yeah, so it allowed them to really like take ownership over this project as well, something they felt invested in. They could send it to their parents right afterwards and say like, hey, this is what I did this semester. And one thing that really helped in creating a sense of ownership was that this was the assignment that they came up with the rubric for themselves. And so that would be another like medium to low stakes thing that you could do in the classroom, which relates totally to our conversations about assessment as well. And so what I did was I had handed out this blank rubric. I advised them, to go look at some of the other rubrics we've used, and they had to come up with categories for the rubric. And then it was almost like a think, pair, share thing. Like they did it individually, then we talked in little groups, and then we had a big conversation because like a lot of them would use different terms, like, but we're kind of talking about the same thing. And so eventually we ended up with this. This was their rubric for their website. I think I should be able to zoom in a little so you can, oh God, where is it? Okay. All right, so we have purpose, which some of them have been calling motive. How easy is it to navigate? How is it organized? What kind of content? Is everything properly cited, right? Is the introduction collaboratively authored? All the things that it was supposed to be. And it was also an exercise in having them provide evidence for their claims, which is something we really work on in basic composition. Is like any statement you make, you have to have textual evidence to support it. And so they had to provide evidence for the different, because, sorry, that was the other thing, is that they used these, they evaluated each other's presentations. So the website group would go up, present their website. Yeah, I think so.
And you'll put this up too. So
Yeah, totally.
That's much better.
Yeah. So like the website content is clear and easy to understand. All information relates to the website's purpose. So there's like a consistent theme going on throughout. Is it aesthetically pleasing? Is it uniform, eye-catching? Are there, not a ton of text? There has to be plenty of images, plenty of space. And these categories emerged from talking about their own experiences of website. What makes a good website, right? Like, how is Facebook organized? What does Amazon look like? What are its aesthetics? And then applying that to their own work. So that is sort of a medium stakes thing that you could try. Peer review for anyone who teaches in like a composition type setting is super important. We use it all the time, so that's when students like will bring in a rough draft in exchange with a partner. And in my experience, it helps if you give them really guided, really pointed things that they're looking for. So like circle the thesis statement, right? Does it meet the 3 categories that a thesis statement? Is it arguable? Is it specific? Does it answer the question of so what? And students really enjoy it in my experience, and it lets them see the transformation and how like having another pair of eyes look at their paper makes it infinitely better. And you could even do it with 1 paragraph from an essay, right? And I'll say, okay, you're gonna read this paragraph and just look for commas. We talked about how to use commas last week. Read this 1 paragraph and you are only looking for commas. Did they do commas correctly? So one of my big questions or interests would be like, what could peer review look like in a chemistry class or in a math class or in classes where I'm not sure if peer review has been implemented as much. I know I've also used it recently for quizzes, and my quizzes have become open friend, open book, open note, and that gets them talking because even if like they're sharing answers, they have to then take their friend's answer and be like, okay, well, is this better than the answer I would have come up with on my own? So they're still using that critical thinking, judgment, trying to weigh the different options, and hopefully coming up with the best possible answer. So I don't know if you guys have any like initial thoughts on this, or if we could just move on if this question calls anyone's attention. Yeah.
I'm from the chemistry class that was heavily on peer teaching.
Great.
We had workshop leaders that took the class a few semesters ago, and they were helping to solve the answers. And the peer review that we had was present the problems on the board in front of the entire class. And the teacher did nothing in terms of contributing to the answer. It was purely students trying to validate if the answer was correct or not.
Wow.
And it helped in terms of boosting the confidence, also getting to know each other in class, and it created awesome environment.
That's great. That's really exciting to hear. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I was just going to throw it really again, but the science thing or the anatomy thing, it really just opens up this whole idea of letting go of control, and it just terrifies me. I mean, but, I'm fascinated by it, but it just terrifies me. It's like, I'm fascinated by that. The chemistry class got up and they came up with their answer, and the teacher didn't say anything. Say again?
It was terrifying at first because you didn't want to make a fool out of yourself.
What, were you the teacher or you?
No, I was both. I was a peer reviewer, and I was also the student.
Well, I'm terrified for everybody. So, not discriminatory in my, but I mean, it's really this whole thing of letting go and really seeing where they, trusting the process, trusting the ingrained human intelligence.
Well, I love the idea of students sort of coming up with the answer collaboratively, because I do think that students, they want to take some ownership and coming up with what they perceive to be the right answer. And I think there's a little bit of pride in that. So if they're working collaboratively to come up with that, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
The research on the success rates on peer review in chemistry, math, Eric Missouri's physics classes is pretty astonishing. I mean, especially are you in the chemistry class that was developed by those 2 women who taught at, I'm not remembering now. They're going to be moving to Queens, but they maybe are.
Donna
Is that the one?
That, and I'm from organic chemistry with Dr. Phillips. She was also doing a very similar.
It's the numbers in terms of success rate, comprehension, objective tests are just kind of astonishing.
What about
Go
time?
ahead.
In the data mining area, or databases, which is what I teach, it's super easy actually, because either it runs or it doesn't run.
Yeah.
It gets the right answer or it doesn't. So you have a pretty good idea, and they're always going to be subjected, professionally to code review, peer review. So it's like part of the process. And so the earlier you take the training wheels off, the better it is for that.
Okay, now what's the what time consuming is that?
The great thing about peer review is that for the instructor, it saves you so much time, right?
Much faster.
It's I don't have to.
Then actually teaching.
Totally, much faster.
Yeah, I mean, if for student, especially for rough drafts, right? Like I don't have to spend 6 hours with them working on their thesis statement if they've already spent, half an hour with a peer, like trying to fix and work on their thesis statement. Saves me so much time, right? It's great in the writing classroom.
Yeah, it also really helps with grading. I mean, you get the papers and it's a whole nother level of paper if it hadn't been filtered through the peer review process.
Yeah, but in science, expectations are higher because in the sense that students have to be more or less prepared in advance. You know what I'm saying?
We'll come back to this. We have to move on. We have a lot of.
If they don't know the material, that can be time consuming.
We'll get back to that. We'll see if we can develop some strategies, right? So just another few quick examples. This assignment was designed by Wendy Tronrud. It's really fantastic. And I'm sure you all use blogs in the class, so I won't like harp on this, but 2 to 3 bloggers each class, and they have to analyze the reading and come up with discussion questions, and then all other students in the class comment on their blog posts. And I like to think about this as sort of a prefigurative rehearsal for what will then happen in class. So they've already engaged in a conversation on the blog. I then don't have to be the one. I can sit back. And then students who have blogged, the 2 to 3 bloggers, they come up to the front of the class. They can either read their blog post or just kind of casually talk about it. And they have discussion questions. They facilitate the conversation, right? So this is a student's blog post. She ended with 2 questions. Students responded to her. And so when they walked into class that day, like they had plenty of fodder, they had stuff to go off of. And this also helps teach them like digital literacy, but not even just literacy, basic, how to be polite, like how to give constructive feedback, right? Like they're taught to say, like address the person by name and then to start with something that they did really well and then offer constructive feedback and always sign your name. So just like these basic conventions of what it means to be a good human on the internet, working on those in class.
Very quick thing, Danica. I feel like maybe where we're going with the science, maybe this is where I feel like where we're going, is there's this really rough learning curve and this letting go process, but I think if you're empowering the students to learn this way, as this gets exponential and whatever time is lost perhaps in the beginning, they may make it up tremendously in the last half of the semester as they get moving.
I suppose they get more engaged and they prepare more. They get more motivated because otherwise...
Precisely.
So I won't do too much of this, but as you guys saw, right, we passed out these little strategies for getting students involved in the conversation. As Hillary pointed out, it fails all the time. It never works in my classes, but it's productive still. Like students aren't able to do what's on the little tag that you guys all got, but we're able to have a conversation. Okay, what did your card say? Why was it hard to participate in that way? What are some other strategies, right? And it just forces like those meta conversations about what are we doing in this class? Why are we having a conversation? How does our conversation here relate to writing and how we cite different sources and we incorporate different voices into the conversation of our writing pieces. So this is just an activity. I can post all these examples. And just in the interest of time, we already talked a little bit about, so what's a student-led learning look like in a computer science class with online learning? I feel like blogging is probably so important for online classroom environments, and what roles could blogs play to facilitate your own pedagogical goals and what you're trying to achieve in your classrooms. Oh, and there's just one more. So I've started assigning collaborative homework based on the principle of crowdsourcing. And so students have to contribute one thing to this Google Doc. And we're reading a really difficult chapter from this book called The Promise of Happiness. And so students either had to identify one of the author's crucial interlocutors, one of the people she was citing in her chapter. What was the argument? How did you know? And the others were like, I forget, pieces of evidence she incorporates and something else. And it worked because it created a resource that they could then all go back to. So if they had to write a paper and they wanted to use their AMA but like couldn't really remember what that was about, right? They could go to this Google Doc and it had a collection of resources and notes that they had all produced together for homework. So that's all for mine. I think Michelle's next.
Yeah, I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Because these are great ideas anyway, and they're gonna inspire you in some way. So, to the right?
Yes.
There?
Mm-hmm.
So, when I started thinking about student-centered teaching and decentered teachers and what that really meant, I came across a Walt Whitman poem, called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. And you're not gonna be able to see it here, but basically if you haven't read it, it's about an astronomy lecture and how the student can't get engaged in the class. And so he ultimately is trying to figure out like how does he pass the class, right? And it's proofs and it's formulas, and it's just a lot of jargon that you can't wrap your head around. And then I found a Zen Pencils comic that illustrated it. And in my literacy class, I do some visual literacy stuff, right? There's a unit where like I ask them we read Knight and Mouse in tandem, and I ask them to sort of do what Art Spiegelman did, but do it for like maybe a scene in Knight, and see how that sort of develops. And it really came out of this Zen Pencils comic strip, because as you can see, he's in the lecture, and hold on, maybe I can get a little bigger. Oops, sorry. That's fine. So he's in the lecture, and eventually, he's discouraged, and then he comes out, and he just lays under the stars, and it all makes sense. Like suddenly he walks back into this classroom with a whole new curiosity, a new interest, and some new knowledge just from being under the stars. So for me, that opened my eyes to this idea of like really interactive learning and what that means. And anything I've learned has always sort of transcended outside of the classroom, where like Maria, you posted the Daedalus statue, right? And that would mean nothing to me unless I also knew the story of Icarus and like somehow fell in love with the story. Now I would also look at the statue. And so these things become meaningful to you once you know something about them. So I like for my students to sort of get involved as much as they can. I stole this from Google Images, just so you know, this is not for my classroom, but it looks like this. I will put up on the smartboard an article or a poem or a song or a Hemingway short story, and I will ask them to just come and free write as we read it aloud, and to just sort of come to the board, draw pictures, take annotations, whatever comes to mind, underline, define, circle, record your thoughts, put a question, a comment, a QCC, whatever. And oftentimes we go paragraph for paragraph and we talk about the notations as we go through it. And someone who's a really confident reader will read it slowly and and there are lines to get to the board. So that's one idea. So this is, again, when I teach the reading class, we negotiate reading strategies on the first or second day that we commit to. We sort of make a list of different things that we do, and then I go, okay, so which one's the most important here? And so they'll raise their hand and they'll say, ask questions while they read, right? We'll vote on that, and if like the majority of the class, that becomes number one. And we go through these things, and then we commit to it for the rest of the semester. And so from that point on, anytime they read, they have committed to using these annotation tools, these reading strategies. And the simplest one, reread it. Somehow always makes the list, and they now do it. But they always say, I didn't do it before. So this is just an example of the visual literacy stuff I might do. I'll ask them I'll make like a bunch of boxes on the board, and I say pick a really powerful scene in Night and draw it. And then I ask the students to come up to the board, look at it before they do like an MLA citation. And I have the students talk about maybe they can find it in the book. So they try to look for the image. And this was recent, and this was inspired by Shanta, actually. When you asked us to do the CUNY map thing, what's our favorite location? So I posted, my class just started, and I did a quick research prompt, Rally in Ireland Against Biased Journalism. And I wanted my students to quickly just kind of do some Google preliminary searching on it. And I said, protest rally in Ireland against biased journalism according to RT Russia Today. Sounds great and all, but I think we need confirmation. I post a link, and then I ask them to find sources that confirm the details. And I say, 1, name the source, 2, tell us the source, how it confirms and refutes, and then 3, provide a link. So that was just
Nice.
And that was you, Sean. And after hearing Danica's idea, you'll see it on the crowdsourced syllabus, I actually needed a good quiz activity, a collaborative quiz activity, because I was just giving them these really boring quizzes. And
Thanks a lot, Michelle.
I'm sorry, but it felt like I didn't want to do it to them, but it was more to make sure they did the reading. So I thought there has to be a better way. And so I'm sorry.
There you go, that helps, doesn't it?
I got Bill Kelly to back off. I'll get you to back off too.
Well, this might work for you, actually. I had my students come up with the quiz questions, and then they exchanged them. This was only to show me they did the reading, and they exchanged them, and part of the quiz is they're graded on the questions and graded on the answers that they give. So, yeah. And now Hallie will take it over.
And I want to do this really quickly because hopefully we'll have time for a little bit of wrap up. So I teach art history, and I've taught introduction to art history many times. So,
sorry.
This way.
Right arrow?
Okay. And so for a while, I based my introduction to art history and the modern art course that I teach on giving students tools to do visual analysis and to write about art, and then having them sort of enact those processes in class, and it's very discussion-based class. But a new goal that I have is getting them to generate some of the content that we're analyzing as well, and to kind of determine the pathways that the class takes. So one of the ways that I've been doing that this semester is my class is organized in a thematic way, and we started with the theme of power, and I had each of my students post an image that represented power to them that they've seen in their contemporary life. This is just one example, and to write about why that represents power to them. And then we started the class and started the conversation with those works, and then brought them in as they came along. And having the class be rooted sort of in the contemporary everyday environment of the students makes them much more engaged, and also I think makes it much more interdisciplinary because they're all sort of bringing their own disciplines into the mix of the conversation. And another way that I've done that is to have my students who are artists bring what they're doing into the class. That's something that's really specific to art history, but it goes along with what we were saying earlier about sort of knowing your students and having them know each other and having and sort of entering it into the conversation. This is a student doing a performance. And then two things that I haven't done yet, but I would like to try with my students. One, using Instagram. And for art history, this is sort of an obvious thing. I'm showing you museum selfies on the right, and then just an image from around the city. On the left and then the right. And I think this is something that can be brought into other disciplines as well. But having students sort of create an archive of visual images that can then be referenced in the class. And again, it's about bringing their immediate surroundings into the classroom. Also having...
Just to make a plug, if you do an Instagram, if you do images from CUNY, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
Have your students take them, actually.
Yeah.
Be great.
And then Prezi is another tool that I haven't used yet, but TikTok. And I'm using Prezi for the first time, as you can see. But TikTok is a collaborative timeline tool. It seems that you have to pay. Some schools might have subscriptions, but if you just share your password and your login with your students.
I've never had.
Oh, really? And your students have collaborated on it?
Yep.
Close your ears, Sean.
Okay, so that's great. And I was going to say just sharing your username and password with your students, but making a collaborative class timeline as a way to review or as a way for them to bring images or moments from history into the classroom. And then finally, something that I'm doing next week with my students is having them make a student-generated study guide. So I'll break them into groups and actually use the same roles that we used today, and then have them each work on one of the sort of key works from our class, and then teach it to the classroom and have a document study guide that everybody can share. And I'm really excited about doing that in my class.
Science time-saving device.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we wanted to close. Do we have like 5 minutes?
We have 5 minutes.
We wanted to close with a think, pair, share, where we ask you which of all. We actually wanted to give you a moment of pause, but I think we're gonna cut that moment. We'll have a second of pause.
10 seconds of pause.
10 seconds of pause. Take a breath. We've run through a lot. We've done a lot. So we wanted to close by asking you to do a think, pair, share, where you're thinking about one thing that you can take from today and think about trying in your classroom. So I know we've given you a lot. I can see Richard shaking his head.
It's a good shake.
It's a good shake. That's great. But think about one thing that you can immediately see working in your class.
So 90 seconds.
90 seconds to write it down. 90 seconds to share. Yeah.
Hey guys,
Yes.
can we have your attention for 1 minute?
And we wanna talk about homework.
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 Yay.
Let's take a student vote.
All right, let's go through this quickly.
This is where the student-centered thing is out the window.
Let's go through this quickly so we can hear a few of the projects that you guys will be trying, or activities that you'll be trying over the next week.
Yes.
So, right, number 1 task, implement the student-centered assignment or activity and be prepared to report back. I'll get to this in a second. This assignment, right? Post a blog reflecting on your teaching philosophy. Be as idealistic or pragmatic as you choose. So some questions that you might want to use to answer that question. How do you situate yourself in the classroom? Ranciere has given us some vocabulary for doing that. Cathy has given us some vocabulary, right? So what readings or what terms do you use to think about your relationship in the classroom? Why do you teach? And what do you hope your students to get out of your classes? So it can be a paragraph, it can be 6 paragraphs, whatever you want, but please just post that to the Futures site.
Public or private?
What do you guys think? I was hoping to do it on the public version.
You need to blog anyway.
You need to blog anyway, there we go. So that'll be your blog for the week. And then the last thing is we ask that you just add one quick thing to this Google Doc that we're hoping to sort of, again, practice that idea of crowdsourcing. So add an idea for an activity or an assignment. This is great. Also, Michelle added, she has a call for something that she needs. So not just things that you already have in your toolbox, like what are you looking for? What are you on the lookout for? That way we can match the needs with the skills and we can combine and work on these together. We also have a list of resources. So specific texts or thinkers who have been important for your own thinking about student-centered pedagogy and links to any of those. And then any like history, events, theories, anything that comes to mind that might be useful for people if we want to think more together about student-centered pedagogy. So 3 tasks, right? You guys got all 3 of those?
And will you'll post it so people know and you'll give us a link.
Absolutely.
But please talk to each other and have, on this syllabus.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it.
Okay, so does anybody want to share their what they will take into their class? Yeah.
Well, I want to share, but I also have an emergency call for help. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have a good, so I'm having our students tomorrow bring their syllabi from all their various courses. So I think it's important and complicated because their biggest fears about college in general are, and coming out from going on to on, but like are failure, just, failing, not understanding, not having control over what they're doing there. So I guess I'm just wondering if anyone has any like syllabus activities and how that matches to like calendar planning. Maybe they can work together on each other's syllabi.
Put them in pairs.
Yeah.
Put them in pairs, but change the pair strength so that like if you're doing 2 syllabi, have one on one, have one pair, and then have a different pair. But you can either do you can either have I help you for 20 minutes and you help me for 20 minutes, and then then if you bring a second syllabus in, different pair, 20 minutes and 20 minutes.
Okay, got it.
Try that.
Yeah.
And have them. Are they doing it online or are they doing it on documents?
On documents.
On documents.
Yeah.
Is there a way they can
FaceTime,
give
I think.
somebody something to take away? Maybe have them bring in 2 comprehensive syllabus so somebody can take this the person who takes the syllabus away, and they
maybe
can take notes
use-
on it.
They'll have lots of syllabi, so maybe the ones that they're most challenged by
Yeah.
are, right.
They
And
have
is the
something
goal-
they can take away physically that they can refer to. I think that might be the
Right.
most important part.
And is the goal to share resources or to help each other schedule or?
The goal is to help each other, both understand understand their syllabus and be able to take ownership over it. So meaning understand what's going on there and then plan, have some calendar to
You might want to make some prompts for them in the group activity too.
Yeah.
Like deadline, what are the course requirements?
Right.
What are the deadlines, and have them collaboratively write that in? What, make a calendar, what are the deadlines?
That's such a great idea. I
It's
love that.
fantastic. It's a
Have
beautiful idea.
you thought about introducing them to some sort of tool for calendar planning, like Google?
I have.
Google
Do you
Calendar.
have
I
what
love
you're
Google
saying?
Calendar.
Google
It's great.
Calendar as their, because that was sort of the next.
Yeah.
Like I was asking students, what do you use? What do they use?
Google's the
Most
best.
of them want something like electronic and hard copy. But yeah, Google.
Why wouldn't they compare that with other agendas in their lives?
Sorry?
Like the syllabus.
Why would they what?
Match that with other agendas in their lives.
Yeah, I think you mean figure it into their Google Calendar with the rest of what's going on in their life?
That's a great idea.
If they are the problem with students, I suppose they're not even planning other aspects of their lives. Maybe by looking at the syllabus, now they have to think, oh,
Yeah.
what do I need to do this and this and that?
Exactly.
That's great, that's a great thing, mark time, this is my kid's birthday, so I'm gonna be preoccupied on this time.
Right.
This I
Yeah,
have to
it's a
do,
time
my
management
driver's
thing.
test that
Yeah,
day, or
exactly.
my citizenship test that day, this is gonna be a difficult
And
time.
also, when do they think that really the deadlines that are not in the syllabus, the deadlines about what they need to execute, how well do they face it? Why don't they talk about that? Because students tend not to want to do their work ahead of time. They want to do that the last minute, and that's when they
Time management is such a huge issue, and I think Google Docs is so awesome because it allows you to create like different calendars and stuff for private or
Okay.
different.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
No, thank you, that was awesome. Thank you for participating.
Actually, thumbs up and thumbs up everybody.
Thank you.